Hey guys, this is the Disassembly and Reassembly guide for my P90 version 6 Gearbox. If you saw my other video, you already know how to get down to this point. So let's get started. Just a note, your wiring will probably not look like mine because I've redone the wiring with 16 gauge wiring, which does fit inside of the lower receiver. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the wiring and the wiring harness. So take off the motor tabs. They just slide right off. Mine are a little bulky because I redid those when I redid the wiring. Then there are 3 screws here at the front, one here, one here. They're all the same size, so they'll be easy to know which ones are the right ones. Take those out. You don't actually have to take them all the way. Just make sure they're unscrewed. I prefer to leave them in so that they don't get lost. But you guys can do whatever you want. So now that those are unscrewed, the wiring harness will pop right off, including the motor wiring. Set that off to the side because you won't need it. Next thing you'll want to do is remove the motor. Right now, the P90 uses a long type motor. For anyone who is wondering, right now I have an AMP torque motor in it. So this screw here, and there's supposed to be a 3rd screw here. I don't know what happened to it, but it seems okay with just the screws here and here. Oh wait, I lied. That screw right there is part of the wire harness. Fits in right there. That's where it disappeared to. So take out these 2 screws. These ones you'll actually need to take all the way out, by the way. Just lift them out. Stick them to the magnetic motor so they don't get lost. Just take the motor right out, set it off to the side. Next thing you'll want to do is remove one last screw at the very front of the gearbox, right there. Remove that little screw, not all the way out. Take out the little screw, stick it onto the motor. The motors are a great place to store little screws because at least my torque motor is very magnetic. Nothing will come off of it. Next you'll want to slide off this little metal piece. Goes right here. Slide it right off. The first couple times it will be pretty difficult to slide off. But once you've done it a couple times, it'll just pop right off very, very easily. That's everything you need to take out of this gearbox. Take your little screwdriver. This is why you can't just use the big one. Take the little screwdriver, slide it into, you've got this little hole right in the back of the gearbox connected to the spring guide. Slide the screw in there, screwdriver in there. Put leverage on it so that you hold everything down when you take off the shell. You heard that popping noise, that was some spring tension being relieved. Take out the spring guide and the spring. Right now I've got about an M110 spring in here. My gears kind of exploded, so I've got 3 gears right here. That one stayed in nicely, so I'll leave it there. Then you've got your air nozzle and tappet plate. This is a King Arms air nozzle, or King Arms tappet plate, I mean. King Arms tappet plate, version 6. It does work very well in this gun. I heard that some people don't like the King Arms tappets, but I can't seem to find any problems with them. Then you've got your piston and your piston head. These are just standard parts, the cylinder head. Standard version 2, version 3 parts here. The only non-standard parts in this gearbox that are specifically for version 6 are these 2 pieces, version 6 only, and this gear. I can't quite remember which gear this is. They all have awesome names. But this one that hooks onto the tappet plate to draw it back, and a regular version 2 gear has a much smaller little indent right there. So if you use a version 3 gear at least, which I believe are the same as version 2, if you use a gear with a smaller head right there, then it will fail to bring back the tappet plate. So you have to use version 6 gears, at least this gear, with the P90. The P90 also uses 7mm bushings, not 6mm bushings, so just be aware of that. Okay, this little spring right here, this spring slides in right there. It hooks onto the tappet plate. So, as you can see, the P90 gearbox, the version 6, is incredibly easy to take apart. And it's just as easy to put back together as long as you don't have too strong a spring. The stronger the spring, the harder it will be to take apart the gearbox. So if you are a huge fan of high FPS, then I'm sorry. First, what you'll want to do when reassembling is to make sure that all the bushings are in their places. This one's here because this gear never popped out like the other ones did. My gearbox is already shimmed. If you don't know how to shim, basically you're just adding these little washers to each end of the gears to make sure that the gears mesh nicely and that they spin and everything. So this is what a shim looks like, by the way. It's right there. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's these tiny little washers right there. They just slide on to each little piece of the gear. This is the AR latch, and this is another piece, the anti-reversal latch. Another piece that is specific to a version 6 gearbox. You can't use a version 2, or version 3, version 6 anti-reversal latch. So keep all that in mind. Putting everything back together is pretty simple. What you'll want to do is just take the air nozzle and the tappet plate, hook it on to this part of the cylinder head. Just stick it right on there. It'll fit into place nicely because the cylinder heads are designed for that. When you're putting everything back together, if you end up disassembling, if you take off the head here, you want to try to line up that hole with that hole. I don't know if it actually makes a difference, but it just makes it nicer to remember where everything is. And then when you line up the piston, keep the line of the piston. You'll see there's a line right there, so it'll fit into the gearbox. That line will line up right there. Again, I'm not sure if that actually matters, but it helps to be able to see this. So I like to line up the holes. Then this little hook on the tappet plate, right there, hopefully you can see that. Right there, that hook. Remember that little spring? We'll just take that hook, put it right there. Actually, I changed my mind. Before you do any of that, let's put our gears back together. So take this gear, a little bump on it, put it inside of its bushing, then take this other gear, which I'm sorry I don't know what they're called by memory. I know they each have a name. All my gears are spinning, that's good. I'm not going to put the AR latch in yet because if I put it in now it'll just fall out. So then what you're going to do, you're going to take this assembly, hook the tappet plate onto the little spring right there. And this might take some practice. It helps if you prop the spring up a little bit, like so. Prop it up so that you don't have to reach the tappet plate down as far. And so that way, hopefully you won't mess with your gears, which are already nice and in place. So then push that back. The cylinder and everything should slide back. The cylinder has its own slot in the gearbox that you can see. So if the cylinder's sitting in its slot, you know that it's correct. And the piston also has a slot. I don't know if you can see it, but it runs down there. There's a little slot in the piston. The piston, let's get the gear out of the way. The piston will be able to slide back and forth on that little shaft. So that's how you know your piston's in place. Now what we're gonna do is take the anti-reversal latch, this little annoying piece, we're going to remove this first gear and to put the AR latch in case you don't quite know, because it took me a while to figure it out. You've got this spring on it. The spring goes on like that. There's a part of it that'll hook right onto the latch, and another part will be hanging off. Put it in its hole any way you want so that the spring is inside of the gearbox, and then you'll want to bend it back, put the gear in, then release it. And it helps a little bit if you spin gear a couple times. It'll look a little bit unstable, but it's okay as long as it goes back in and the bushings line up with the other side of the gearbox shell. That's the phone. So once this is all done, you've got all this in. Last thing to put in is the spring and the spring guide. By the way, the P90 uses a version 2 spring guide, not version 3. Version 3 won't fit, so get version 2 spring guides. So slide that in, just right into the piston, slide the spring into the piston. Take your screwdriver, slide it into the back of the spring guide. Again, there's that little hole that we saw at the beginning. Slide it right into the spring guide. You want to put your finger on the piston, this whole assembly up here, because if you put the spring in, it can start to put upward pressure on everything, and that can knock things out of place. That's a big pain. So just slide the spring guide in. It has a little hole that that'll slide into the little the spring guide ends will slide right into that. So once that's in, make sure your AR latch isn't falling out. Keep your finger there. Grab the other half of your gearbox shell. Try to keep holding everything down. Line the bushings up with their spots. Hope nothing falls out. This might take a few times to get right, by the way, in case you couldn't tell already. Usually if you kind of jiggle it together, pistons holding it up, the AR latch can go back in. This bushing, by the way, this bushing on this gear needs to go on top of the tappet plate, not underneath it. So yeah, make sure you do that. So now take your gearbox shell. It's pushing. That's why I said to keep your finger there. Stuff will pop up. Usually that bushing or the AR latch. So keep your finger down. Keep everything from falling out, hopefully. Place the gearbox shell back on top. What is getting in the way here? There we go. Alright. Yeah. You never know what's gonna get in the way. Usually jiggling it around. What you want to do though, always make sure your AR latch stays in place and that your bushings stay in place. Because if one of those things is off, you're gonna have to redo the whole thing. Well, not the whole thing, but you're gonna have to take the shell off and try again. Which is quite a pain. So if it's not going on, try jiggling it around for a while. Make sure everything's in its place. This is back in. To keep it from falling apart, we'll take this metal slide and we will put it back on. That should hold it. Then you're going to want to take the little screw that goes at the front of the gearbox, put that back in. Tight. Then you're going to want to take your motor cage. The motor cage, by the way, is fairly easy to take apart. There is normally a screw that fits right in there, in that little hole in the back, but it really doesn't do anything once you've taken the motor cage apart, so I just left mine out. Once that, you'll just need to take that screw out of the back right there, and then just pry your motor cage apart. It'll just pop open one way or the other. You might need a screwdriver. I'm not going to do that right now, but I have changed the motor on here, so all you have to do is pry it out. And to adjust the motor height, you take a small Allen key in the back there, twist it right to tighten the motor, push it in farther, left to loosen the motor, and that's pretty much it to this motor cage. So as I was saying, we'll put the motor back in, just line up the screws, this one here, screw them in. Try not to strip your screws, because if you do, that's very bad. So now those are in place. See, that screw's almost stripped. Next, you're going to want to reattach your wiring harness. And remember, I kept the screws in there. But if you take them out, they are 3 different sizes. Let's get this. Okay, there are 3 different sizes. There is a long one, a medium-sized one, and a really short one. If you can see the difference there. The long one will go in the back, the medium one will go in the middle, the small one will go in the front. So it's pretty easy to remember how that works. So you're just gonna put your wire harness back on here. You've got your cutoff lever there, which will you'll want to line up the cutting lever with cutoff lever with that little hole, right? Which hole is it? You need to line it up with one of the holes. Line up the cutoff lever, and it'll just slip right on nice and easily. The longest screw goes in the back of the wire harness. Medium-sized screw goes in the middle. Smallest screw goes in the front. Take your screwdriver, put them in. Again, don't strip the screws. Then the last thing you'll want to do is reattach your motor tabs. Mine are bent in such a way that I can know where they go, but the positive wire will go on the right side of your motor. It slides back underneath there. Negative wire slides onto the bottom or the left side of your motor. And then that's it for the gearbox disassembly and reassembly. So thank you for watching.